Welcome to another episode of the InfoTech Growth Partner Podcast, the podcast where the future of IT unfolds, and we dive deep into the pertinent developments in regards to IT and data with leaders and experts in the IT consulting field. My name is Jasper, and today I have the pleasure to have Ari Novikoff in the show. Ari is the Global VP of Sales at Macrium Software and is also known as the Bishop of Backup, which you might need to give some context on, Ari, but it's great to have you on the show. Welcome.
Thanks for having me, Jasper. I appreciate it very much. Glad to be here.
Awesome. So for the audience, can you give a little bit of introduction about yourself, about Macrium Software, and what your role within the company is?
Sure. I've been in information technology for over 30 years. I've held various positions in administration, the actual work of sitting down and doing it, to managing people who have done it. I've been a service manager, a service tech. I've been an IT manager. I've been in sales for a long, long time as well. Just all kind of comes together and rounds it all out. Macrium has been around since 2006 and was started by a gentleman by the name of Nick Sills after he recognized an unfortunate data loss incident and realized at that moment in time that the software that was available then wasn't very reliable. So he sat out and decided to create a product as a developer, which eventually became Macrium Reflect. That product has a global reach now, with hundreds of thousands of downloads every month, and quite a large loyal following of users.
Thank you for the introduction. And yeah, that's something we discussed earlier on the talk that we had, is that really it came from a specific need, a specific situation that Nick had. He found that there was not something that he could use, so he decided to build it himself, and that grew into what Macrium Software currently is, which is much more than only the Reflect product that he built. Thank you for the introduction. And what you mentioned as well is in this episode, we really want to dive into backup, because you are the Bishop of Backup, and give us a little bit of introduction, maybe for the listener, why you or when you became the Bishop of Backup.
I was in a networking group when I had my company, which I sold a few years ago. I was in a networking group called Business Network International, and you'd go through a rotation where every member would have a chance to do a 10-minute presentation on something that was near and dear to them, and I always chose backup. So around the third rotation, I started talking about backup, and at the end of the presentation, the accountant in the group, bless him, I love him forever. His name is Kevin Moss, just an amazing guy. Said to me, you are the Bishop of Backup, and that name just stuck. So that was probably about 16 years ago, maybe 17 years ago now. Yeah. So I've been the Bishop of Backup ever since.
That's where it came from. I want to dive, as I said, we want to dive deeper into backup as well, because I think it's a very relevant and important topic. And I think most people and most companies understand that backup is needed in a way. And the way you explained it to me in the past, you mentioned that there are two types of people. Someone who lost data and had to deal with all of the problems that came with it, and someone who didn't lost data in the past, so he or she doesn't really understand the pain. Specifically for that second group, can you share why it is so important to have your backups sorted?
Sure. Data is the lifeblood of any business. If we're looking at it from a business perspective, it's customers, it's your financials, it's your documentation, your processes, your trade secrets. It's any number of different things. Data, when it becomes unavailable to you, becomes a very, very painful source of a discomfort. when you recognize that you have to spend a lot of time rebuilding things or redoing things if you can at all. So, it just becomes ever important to recognize the fact that it's not just, the potential of losing data to accidental deletion or a hard drive failure, or hardware failure in general, but with the increase in surface attacks on businesses from threat actors in the ransomware world, 66% of businesses have suffered or had some kind of surface attack at them from a nefarious person or organization. And this is really the biggest risk now. And if you employ people, then you can spend tons of money on developing the best backup plan, the best recovery plan, and we'll touch on that in a little bit because recovery plan is really important. You can spend thousands and tens of thousands of dollars on XDR, EDR software to do, endpoint detection, analysis, and response. But at the end of the day, it just takes one person not paying attention to click a link to compromise the entire company. So if you have a really good backup and recovery plan, that's really your last line of defense when everything kind of hits the fan. It's not a pleasant experience to be in. When we talk about backup and recovery plan, and again, specifically on the recovery plan side of things, the whole point of having a recovery plan is to familiarize yourself with the process of doing the recovery. So it's validating and verifying that you have the data that you need. It's doing test restores, going through the motions of pretending you've had an experience that you don't want to have, so that when you do have that experience, there are people who will say it's if, not when. I'll politely choose to disagree. Everybody's going to have an experience at some point, whether it be mechanical or intentional or malicious. Unintentional or malicious. Everybody's going to have an experience at some point. So when you have practice and you know how to do that recovery, the panic level tends to be a lot lower as you just kind of work through the process that you already know, that you know works, that you're not worried about. It's just an inconvenient moment, but that inconvenient moment pays dividends, huge dividends.
Yeah. And you mentioned, well, backup is critical. I was just an idea that came to my mind right now is that, is there even a situation where backups are not needed in the situation where everything before it in terms of cybersecurity and all that things, and no person is making any errors? Is there a situation where backup is not needed, or is it always needed?
It really comes down to your comfort with risk tolerance. The best laid plans are always the best laid plans. You think you can go through every possible scenario in your head. As an IT administrator, classic IT administrator, the job is to think about the worst case scenarios, mitigate them to the point where you have a certain comfort with the risk tolerance that you're going to have to bear. I don't know that you can ever get to a zero need or zero effort. Even with cloud, you still need to have some sort of backup in place in case a document's removed, deleted. If you have, like a lot of people do, say OneDrive on your computer, and because you don't want to continuously be pulling files back and forth, you have it synchronized. If your computer gets encrypted, so too does the information in the cloud. It doesn't happen instantly. You have a moment, but if you're not paying attention in that moment, even that stuff winds up being on in the bad pile. So you really do need backup. Even if you don't think that you do, there's probably something that you do need to back up.
Yeah.
And whether that means you're backing up a server that's holding everybody's documents, we're not worried about backing up computers, but we now have a server that becomes the central point of all of your information, that still needs to be backed up, right? So it's just a matter of thinking about things differently, that's all.
Yeah, it was just hypothetical situation that came to mind to me, and I was not really thinking that there would be a situation where it's not needed, because the world, unfortunately, and people, unfortunately, are not perfect. In regards to backup, can you tell us a little bit about the practical best practices of backup and the biggest challenges that most companies face trying to implement those best practices?
So the best practices for backup are really simple, fortunately. The challenge is that when you create the best practices, you have to follow them. And that means doing backup verification. Without verification, you only have a potential backup. And a potential backup means that you may or may not have the data that you need, and the wrong time to find out is when you actually need it. So, best practices for backup. Um, Firstly, create a backup policy. Figure out how you need to back up, what you need to back up, how often you need to back it up. I like to think of it as a W5, right? Who, what, where, when, why. The who is what computers. The what is what data on those computers. The when is the frequency that you need to do your backups. Do I need to do a full backup every time? Do I need to do a full with differentials? Do I need to do a full with differentials and incrementals? What is my backup process going to be? So it's defining that. The where is where you're going to save the backup. And I fully encourage people to think about the 3-2-1 backup strategy. Just 3 copies of your data in 2 different locations, one of them offsite. Preferably disconnected, so that if anything bad happens, you have a disconnected copy of your data. I did a ransomware seminar yesterday with a cybersecurity expert, and he was telling me about a company, a large company in the UK that when WannaCry hit, took out all of their Active Directory controllers in their networks. And with the multiple locations that they had globally, Active Directory takes about 15 minutes to synchronize. So within 15 minutes, all of the Active Directory controllers, meaning all access to everything, was offline. Full panic set in, and it turned out that one location the day before WannaCry hit was taken down because of power cuts, and they were just starting to come online, and they were contacting the head office to say, hey, we can't connect to the VPN, we're trying to get online. And head office immediately said, disconnect the server, put it on a private chartered jet, send it to us, and they were able to replicate from that. So that offline component is really important when you think about that. Now, most organizations aren't that size. We don't have that kind of, reach and things along that line. But if you think about what your critical data is and what happens if that critical data disappears, then you start to think about, how can I make sure that it doesn't? So that 3-2-1 backup strategy, really, really important. So the who, the what, the where, the when, the why we need backup. That's it. We just do. We are humans. We are prone to make mistakes. We are prone to inevitabilities that are beyond our control. Some of them hardware, some of them unintentional oopses, and some of them are intentional. Misguided folks who decide that they've got nothing better to do than to target somebody for no other reason than to just make them have a bad day or extort money from them. So we know the why. So once we've covered off those W5s, the who, the what, the where, the when, the why, we now have at least the basic structure for a backup strategy. Now the best practices are to enable those tests, make sure that we have what we need, make sure that we have the space to store it, make sure that we have the proper people and the proper processes in place, so that we can automate as much of that as possible, because the less human requirement there is in it, the more automation that happens in it, the less chance there is of failure. We want to know that there's reporting. We want to know that there's a log that we can go in and review. We want to regularly verify and test those backups. And we want to practice those recovery situations to make sure that, as I said earlier, when bad things happen, we're not in that state of panic. We're well rehearsed, well practiced. We can go out on stage and do performance hopefully to a standing ovation of an executive committee who's very, very pleased with the results. Or if you're a small business, you're able to get back up and running and online as quickly as possible. So when you have all of these things in place, that's what constitutes a good strategy. Other than that, you want to take a look at some other things that are outside of backup, and you want to make sure that you have some kind of ransomware protection. You want to look at cyber insurance. You want to look at best practices from the industry that you're in. You want to look at industry regulation and make sure that you're adhering to those specific standards, at least at minimum. Exceeding them is even better. And I've done some work with a partner of ours who very soon he and I are going to sit down together and create tinfoil hat guide to data protection. I promise I'll share a link with you once we do it. But the tinfoil hat guide to data protection is really a sort of over-the-top look at how seriously we can take a look at protecting specific pieces of data. He does a lot of work in the dental medical field. So when he's working with these medical and dental offices, he's trying to make sure that their information is safe and secure, because there's regulatory requirements for how long they have to keep information, how that information is protected, who can access that information, and so on. So he really is quite well versed in our product and quite well versed in setting up some really interesting ways to keep that data safe.
Yeah. And again, you explain it like it's the basics, it's the bare minimum that you have and need to have in place in regards to backup. I can imagine that in specifically smaller businesses, this is not really something that they can dedicate a person to, or that they can implement and keep updating every month, week, whatever. What do you see in those businesses, in most businesses? Where do you see it going wrong in regards to the basics? What are the things that they don't do which expose them to dangers, expose them to financial loss and other business impact as well?
It sounds like a broken record when we talk about this, but really what it comes down to is not cheaping out in the areas that you think you can cheap out in. I tell a story about when I first took on a client from a friend of mine. He was really, really great desktop guy, not a great server guy, and that was a self-admitted fault of his. So when he was at a particular business in my city, he called me up and he said, "Hey, I've been at this for 22 hours and I can't figure this out. I know servers are your thing. Can you come and help me?" So I went out, I helped him, and within a few hours had him up and running. At that point, Jack was, he was late 60s and ready to retire. So he said, "You know what? Thanks for coming out and helping. I'm trying to whittle down my customer list. Would you mind taking over this customer?" And I looked at him and I said, "Are you sure?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "All you need to do is have a meeting with the owner." So I sat down with the owner, and the owner said, "What's your rate?" And I told him my rate. And he just, eyes went wide. He said, "I can't pay you that. That's ridiculous. That's crazy. I'm paying that guy less than half of that." And I said, "Yeah, you are." And Jack and I talked about it. He's going to send you an invoice for 22 hours for the time that he spent working on this that he couldn't solve. And then I came in and solved it in 3. Am I really more expensive than he is? So when you think about things in a cost perspective, you need to look at it from a pragmatic point of view. And that pragmatic point of view means understanding what that cost really is. I can pay somebody a really, really cheap rate to look and do something, or I could pay somebody who really knows what they're doing a little bit more, but in the end, it'll cost me less. Please don't cheap out when it comes to hiring the right person to do the job for you. If you're a small business and you don't have that expertise, hire somebody that does. You go to a doctor to get a diagnosis when you're not feeling well. You go to a dentist to fill a cavity. You don't sit there with super glue and sawdust. You hire a professional, because that's what we do. It's the same thing with IT. Hire a professional, somebody who has the accreditation, somebody who understands the pillars of IT work, somebody who understands the job and the role that you're hiring them for. Please make sure that you've done some research on that person and do that. That's really the big thing. So if you don't have the skill set, recognize that you don't have the skill set and hire somebody that does. It'll save you a lot of grief and heartache in the long run.
Yeah, and as you said, that is the case in all fields. That is the case with your health. That is the case with IT. That is the case with legal. All sorts of things that it's very important to don't really cheap out on. And maybe, and again, I think it's also not looking at it like a cost, but also looking at it like potential impact. And we don't want to be fear mongering here, but
Right.
all companies know that the financial loss and the business impact of cybercrime, those types of things can be really big. With that idea, can you share some examples, real world examples of how bad data backup really resulted in financial loss and other business impact?
I can tell you how good data backup saved ridiculous financial loss.
Maybe even better.
There's a couple of clients that come to mind. The first client is a sales organization that, and I'm talking about when I was running my business at the time. So there's a sales organization that I dealt with. They dealt with refrigeration, cooling, and restaurant supplies. Their receptionist, a wonderful young lady, who had a habit of clicking on every email and every link in every email, regardless of how many times you've had the conversation about stop, think, act. It just, you can only train people so many times. And sure enough, she clicked on a PDF that had a payload in it. And a few days later, her computer came up with the big, dreaded ransomware screen. This was one of those worm type ransomwares that jumped from her computer to the shares on the network. And because she had fought with the owner so many times about needing access to specific stuff, he finally got frustrated and gave her access to everything. So everything on the server and the server shares was encrypted. And that was despite numerous amounts of protest on my part. But sometimes you just have to learn the hard way. Some people just need to learn the hard way. So thankfully, with a good backup strategy, we were able to completely recover the server from scratch, take her computer offline, take the hard drive out, put a drill through it several times, throw it in the garbage, put a brand new hard drive in, reinstall the operating system, and do everything from scratch. Nothing was stored on her computer except some personal photos and some music files that she liked. Everything else was stored on the company shared directories, which were on the server. So it was easy to do that recovery. But having that backup strategy and understanding where the risks were made it easier to do that recovery. It was still inconvenient. It still took time. They were down for 3 days while we were doing mitigation checks to make sure that it didn't go anywhere else. Because, once you have an infection, you need to make sure it didn't spread. So once we were satisfied that everything was looking okay and looking at, inbound, outbound traffic reports to make sure that things weren't going to places that weren't expected, we brought everything back up online. But that was a 3-day process. Another example was a manufacturing steel fabrication plant just outside the city that I dealt with. The general manager of the shop, absolutely brilliant person. Not the most technical savvy guy in the whole world, but brilliant at what he did. Decided they wanted to save some money. Again, here's the cheap out part, right? Decided that they wanted to try and save some money. We had talked about the state of their drives and their RAID array. It was older. It was pushing 5-6 years. It was time to retire some hard drives and do hard drive replacements, expand the array and give them more space. To do that requires a specific process, one that I'm very familiar with that he wasn't. So when he asked me, how do you do it? I said, well, there's a process that's involved. He figured, I got this. Brought brand new hard drives into the server room, opened up the drive bay, pulled out a drive. This is a RAID 5 array. Pulls out the first drive, puts the new drive in. Normally you'd wait for that rebuild to happen before you do the second drive, the third drive, the fourth drive, and so on. No, he replaced all the drives at once. Brought the array down. That was his main drawing system. So all of the drawings for all of the laser machines that he was doing, the cutting, the folding, the bending, the tubing, offline. Everything is offline. Friday, 5 o'clock in the evening. He's on the phone with me going, Ari, help. So fortunately, we had that backup and we were able to get them back up online. Still took a while. Again, there's a process with RAID that's not time friendly, but we were able to get him online and get him back up and running quickly. It's just a matter of making sure that you have those plans in place and that you test and recover so that you can be comfortable when you get that call that everything is going to be okay.
Yeah, and on that last note, it's not about, and you've mentioned that in the beginning as well, it's not only about having backups, it's about continuously verifying and testing whether that process works, just, well, going through the plans, through the motions, just as if there was a major problem. Can you share a little bit about that, about what companies should do in order to make sure that their backup process, their recovery plan is sorted when it comes to, well, by doing verification and testing?
Do the verification and testing. That's really it. The only way you know that something's going to work is to try it. And when you've tried it and it's successful, you know that it's likely going to work. When you've tried it and it's successful again, you're even more likely it's going to work. When you've done it over and over again to the point that you're comfortable, you could do it in the dark with your eyes closed, you got it. You're there. The key is that you know that when a bad situation happens, you're going to be in a panic state. And the last thing you want to do is have panic overriding logic, because when panic sets in, logic goes out. So if you are prepared for that situation through practice, you know that when you sit down and you go at it, there's no doubt in your mind that everything is going to be okay. So you can keep the panic settled while you work through the logic piece of all the steps that you need to go through. And documentation is your friend. Please document your process. Once you're satisfied with it, document it. If you step out into traffic and get hit by a bus tomorrow, somebody else needs, heaven forbid, somebody else needs to be able to step in and do that. So make sure that you have documentation on the process.
Wow. Yeah, it just goes back to having the basics in order and making it a habit and going through a logical process whenever the point that you actually need it is there. That is very interesting, and yeah, I'm curious about the future, like based on your experience, based on all of your years in the field in different roles. Can you tell us a little bit about the trends and developments that you see in backup, in cybersecurity, and that you think will be of impact to businesses in the next couple of years?
So I know we don't want to talk about fear, uncertainty, doubt. So I'll try and keep that relatively muted.
We can.
Cyber criminals are not going away. We continuously reinforce their ability to be there by paying ransoms and by giving them what they're asking for to minimize our exposure or downtime. And once you're a customer who pays, you are going to be a repeat customer of theirs because that's the way that it works. So until we make it difficult for them to earn a living from our hard work, then that's going to be the case. So backup and recovery plans are going to be even more essential as we go forward. Tools always only catch up to what the bad guys are doing. The bad guys invent new and creative ways to take stuff from us, and then we play catch up to try and prevent that from happening. We're always a step behind. It's a mouse cat game, cat and mouse game, however you want to phrase it. We're always trying to play catch up. So just keep that in mind. Let that sort of govern your decisions on how you look at data and how you look at data protection. AI, well, we're in the world of AI now. So AI is going to look at things, or going to help us look at things differently. AI will help us look at logs. It'll help us look at trends. It'll help us look at incidents on our network. With SIEM software, with EDR, XDR, AI is becoming more and more intelligent in those areas. They're spotting trends earlier. They're spotting anomalies earlier, with and without false positives, but it's doing its job in learning. So AI is going to be a very critical piece of cybersecurity, and it's not to say that it's going to displace cybersecurity professionals. Nothing's ever going to displace a human from thinking about things the way that humans think about things. But it's just going to definitely be a significant assistive technology or assistive component of the technology that we use.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense, and especially the thing what you mentioned, like we're always playing catch up to those people, because that is their day job, figuring out holes, figuring out ways to tap into companies, tap into new data, and we'll always play catch up. I think that is the main thing that will always be there, now and in the future. Well, thanks, Ari. I think we've discussed some very relevant stuff in regards to backup. This topic hasn't been discussed in the podcast yet, so thank you for that. It gave me a better perspective on that on the topic as well. If there's someone watching this conversation, wants to learn more about you, about Macrium Software, wants to talk with you, where can they best find you?
Our website's macrium.com, macrium.com. Please visit us there. You can put in a sales query. You can put in a support query. If you want to reach out to me directly, you can share my email address if you'd like. Be happy to chat with anyone.
Sure. I will make sure that all of those links are in the description as well, so people can easily find you and find Macrium. Well, thanks again, Ari. Really enjoy this, and all I want to say is good luck with everything that you're doing.
Thanks, Jasper. Really appreciate it, and it's great to have been here. Have a great one.
Thank you.